I stood alone at my father's funeral, watching as Sandra, his wife of only 8 months, sobbed dramatically into her handkerchief. The tears seemed to flow on cue whenever someone approached her. Yet I caught the calculating look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. 3 days later, she called me to a meeting about Dad's will. Her grief magically vanished. What she did not know was that my father had left me one final gift, a secret that would turn her perfectly orchestrated plan upside down. Let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I outsmarted the woman who thought she had won it all. Growing up, my relationship with my father, Thomas Warner, was the foundation of my life. After losing my mom to cancer when I was 12, it was just Dad and me against the world. Thomas was not just my father. He was my hero, mentor, and best friend, all rolled into one. He built Warner Properties from nothing into one of the most respected real estate development companies in the Northeast. Our family home, a stunning colonial-style mansion in the suburbs of Boston, reflected his success and impeccable taste. Despite his demanding career, Thomas never missed a single important moment in my life. He coached my Little League baseball team, attended every school play, and taught me how to change oil in our cars. The nights we spent on our back porch, discussing business strategies and life philosophies, shaped who I am today. When I graduated with my business degree at 24, there was never any question about where I would work. I joined Warner Properties, immediately eager to learn the business from the ground up and eventually take over the company my father had built. My dad was not just successful in business, he was respected for his integrity. Contractors knew his handshake was as good as a contract. Clients trusted him implicitly. His employees were loyal because he treated them like family. Thomas Warner was the kind of businessman people do not make anymore, someone whose word meant everything. For years, it was just the two of us running the company together, expanding our portfolio, venturing into commercial developments, and even starting a small foundation to build affordable housing. Life was good, and I assumed it would continue that way for many years to come. Everything changed when my father met Sandra Phillips at a charity gala in the summer of 2021. At 58, my father was still handsome and vibrant, with just enough gray at his temples to make him look distinguished. Sandra was 33, with chestnut brown hair, green eyes, and the kind of polished beauty that comes from careful maintenance. She worked as a personal financial advisor, and from the moment she approached my father at that gala, I could tell something was different. Sandra was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my father and his work. Within weeks, Dad had hired her as a financial consultant for Warner Properties. I watched as she smoothly integrated herself into our company, winning over staff with thoughtful gestures and insightful financial recommendations. She remembered birthdays, brought coffee to early meetings, and stayed late to help with quarterly reports. But something about her never sat right with me. It was subtle the way her smile would drop the second my father turned away, or how her voice changed, depending on who she was talking to. With my father, she was warm and deferential. With employees, she deemed important, she was professional and engaging. With those she considered beneath her, including me at times, there was an icy edge to her interactions. I tried to ignore my unease. After all, my father seemed happier than he had been in years. He started leaving the office early for dinner dates. He bought new suits and started using a fancy cologne. When he spoke about Sandra, his eyes lit up in a way I had not seen since my mother was alive. Just 3 months after they met, Sandra moved into our family home. The change in my father was immediate and concerning. He began deferring to Sandra on matters he would have never sought advice on before. Major business decisions suddenly required her input. Our Sunday morning breakfasts, a tradition since I was a child, were now often canceled because Sandra had made other plans for them. I started to notice small changes around the house, too. Family photos disappeared from prominent places. My mother's favorite reading chair was replaced with a modern lounger Sandra preferred. The house that had been my home for decades was slowly transforming into a space where I felt increasingly unwelcome. My best friend Jake, who had grown up next door to us and now worked as a detective, voiced his concerns when we met for drinks one evening. "Something about her does not add up, Donovan," he said, keeping his voice low. "The way she swooped in and got your dad to hire her, move her in, change his routines. It is textbook." "Textbook? What I asked, though, I feared I already knew the answer," Gold Digger Jake replied bluntly. "I have seen it before in my line of work. Targeting wealthy older men, fast-tracking relationships, isolating them from family. Just be careful, all right. Keep your eyes open." I wanted to dismiss Jake's warnings as overprotective friend talk, but I could not shake the feeling that he might be right. I tried researching Sandra's background, but found surprisingly little for someone who claimed to be a successful financial advisor. Her social media presence only went back 3 years, and information about her previous employment was vague at best. When my father announced their engagement, after just 6 months of dating, I felt sick to my stomach. I tried to talk to him privately, suggesting they might want to take more time to get to know each other, perhaps consider a prenuptial agreement. "Son, when you get to my age, you realize time is precious," he said, patting my shoulder. "Sandra makes me happy. Is not that what you want for your old man?" Then he added something that should have reassured me, but only heightened my anxiety. "Besides, I have updated my will and made certain arrangements. Trust me, I know what I am doing." The wedding was small and private, held in the garden of our family home. Sandra looked stunning in a simple white dress, playing the part of the blushing bride perfectly. Throughout the ceremony and reception, she maintained the image of a woman madly in love, gazing adoringly at my father and charming all our guests. It was pure chance that I overheard her speaking with James Porter, our family lawyer, in the study during the reception. I had gone looking for my father, but stopped short when I heard Sandra's voice through the cracked door. "How soon can the paperwork be finalized?" She was asking, her tone entirely businesslike, nothing like the warm, loving voice she used with my father. "These things take time," Mrs. Warner Porter replied. "Transferring assets of this magnitude requires proper documentation and review." I stepped away before they could notice me, my stomach in knots. What assets was she talking about? What was she rushing to finalize so quickly after the wedding? The happiness of the wedding was short-lived. Just 2 months after they said their vows, my father began experiencing persistent fatigue and unexplained weight loss. I urged him to see a doctor, but Sandra insisted it was just stress and suggested he needed more rest. When he finally did see a specialist, the diagnosis was devastating: stage 4 pancreatic cancer, already metastasized to his liver. The prognosis gave him perhaps 3 months to live. Sandra immediately positioned herself as his primary caregiver, controlling his medication schedule, doctor appointments, and who could visit and when. What had once been subtle control tactics now became blatant. She hired a private nurse who reported only to her, had the locks changed on several doors in the house, and screened all of my father's calls. "Your father needs rest," became her constant refrain when I tried to spend time with him. The doctor said too much excitement could worsen his condition. My time with Dad became severely restricted, always supervised by either Sandra or the nurse she had hired. In the rare moments we were alone, my father seemed different, subdued in a way that went beyond his physical illness. His eyes would dart to the door whenever we heard footsteps, and he kept our conversations superficial, as if afraid of being overheard. As my father grew weaker, Sandra grew bolder. She began making personnel changes at Warner Properties, firing longtime employees and bringing in her own people. The new financial officer she hired, a man named Victor Reed, began questioning my authority on projects and undermining my decisions in meetings. One afternoon, I received a call from Franklin National Bank regarding unusual activity on several company accounts. Large sums were being transferred to new accounts I had never authorized. When I confronted Sandra, she smoothly explained that these were just restructuring measures Thomas had approved before becoming ill designed to optimize our tax situation. I would be happy to show you the paperwork he signed, she offered, with a thin smile that never reached her eyes. But perhaps this is a conversation better had with Victor. These financial matters can be so complex. Her condescension was clear, and it stung. This was my family's company, built by my father and me, yet I was being treated as an outsider. Within weeks, my office had been relocated to a different floor, far from my father's corner office, which Sandra now regularly occupied. The situation went from concerning to alarming when I accidentally discovered a document on Sandra's laptop during a company meeting. She had stepped away, leaving her computer open, and on the screen was an email regarding the potential sale of Warner Properties to Meridian Investments, a corporate development firm known for buying family companies, stripping their assets, and reselling them for parts. When I tried to visit my father that evening to tell him what I had found, I was stopped by a security guard I did not recognize. "Mrs. Warner has requested that all visitors be approved in advance," he informed me stiffly. "She is concerned about Mr. Warner's declining condition." "I am his son," I said incredulously. "I do not need approval to see my own father." The guard remained impassive. "I am sorry, sir. I have my instructions." It took 3 days and the intervention of my father's doctor to finally gain access to him. By then, he was significantly weaker, his once robust frame now skeletal, his skin taking on the yellowish tinge characteristic of liver failure. Sandra remained in the room for most of my visit, hovering nearby, ostensibly adjusting his pillows or checking his IV, but clearly monitoring our conversation. It was Grace, my father's executive assistant of 15 years, who provided my first real ally in this increasingly bizarre situation. She called me late one night, her voice hushed and nervous. "Donovan, we need to talk, but not over the phone and not at the office," she said. "Can you meet me tomorrow at the coffee shop on Maple Street? The one near the courthouse?" The following morning, Grace appeared visibly anxious, checking over her shoulder repeatedly as she slid into the booth across from me. "I should have come to you sooner," she began, "but Sandra has everyone at the office terrified. Last week I stayed late to finish the quarterly reports, and I saw her in your father's office. She was going through his private safe, the one behind the Hopper painting." My blood ran cold. That safe contained my father's most important documents, including the original deed to the company and family trust documents. "There is more," Grace continued. "William from accounting was fired yesterday after he questioned a transfer of $3 million to an offshore account. He called me this morning, said he wanted to warn you that a company called Phoenix Acquisitions has been making inquiries about purchasing Warner Properties." Phoenix Acquisitions, I frowned. I have never heard of them. Neither had William, so he did some digging. They are a subsidiary of Meridian Investments, and get this, their CEO had dinner with Sandra last month at the Ritz-Carlton. There are photos. With Grace's help, I began gathering information, building a case that something sinister was happening. Jake used his contacts to run a deeper background check on Sandra, discovering that her real name was Cassandra Whitmore, and she had been married twice before, both times to wealthy men significantly older than herself. Her first husband died in a boating accident just a year after their wedding. The second divorced her after his children hired a private investigator, though the details had been sealed by the court. Most damning of all was the connection Jake uncovered between Sandra and Victor Reed, the new CFO. They had worked together at 3 different companies, all of which had been acquired by Meridian Investments after experiencing financial difficulties following the deaths or retirements of their founders. Armed with this information, I needed to speak with my father urgently. Our Sunday morning breakfasts, a tradition since I was a child, were now often canceled because Sandra had made other plans for them. I started to notice small changes around the house, too. Family photos disappeared from prominent places. My mother's favorite reading chair was replaced with a modern lounger Sandra preferred. The house that had been my home for decades was slowly transforming into a space where I felt increasingly unwelcome. "She is not who you think she is." To my surprise, he gave a weak smile and reached for my hand. "Son, do you really think I do not know?" I stared at him in shock as he continued each word clearly, taking enormous effort. "I may be old and sick, but I am not a fool. I knew something was off about her from the beginning." "Then why marry her?" I asked, bewildered. "Because I needed to understand what she was after, who she was working with," he replied. I waited until Sandra was scheduled to attend a charity luncheon, then convinced the day nurse to allow me 15 minutes alone, with Dad slipping her a generous tip for her cooperation. My father was sleeping when I entered his room, but he woke as I sat beside his bed. His eyes, though sunken, were clearer than I had seen in weeks. "Donovan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was hoping you would come today." "Dad, I need to tell you something about Sandra," I began urgently. Before I could ask more questions, we heard footsteps in the hallway. My father quickly pressed something into my palm, a small key on a plain ring. "Not a word to Sandra," he whispered urgently. "Promise me." "I promise," I said, just as the door opened and Sandra entered, her face darkening when she saw me. "The nurse told me you were here," she said coldly. "Your father needs his rest, Donovan. You will have to come back another time." As I stood to leave, my father gave my hand one final squeeze. It was the last time I would speak to him alone. The call came at 2:30 in the morning, jarring me from a restless sleep. My father had been rushed to the hospital after his breathing became labored. By the time I arrived, he was gone. Sandra was already there, her makeup perfectly tear-streaked, receiving condolences from the hospital chaplain. When she saw me, she embraced me stiffly, her body language performing grief, while her eyes remained calculating. "He went peacefully," she said loudly enough for the nurses to hear. In my ear she whispered, "We need to discuss arrangements and the will. Come to the house tomorrow at 10. The funeral was a masterclass in performance. Sandra spared no expense, arranging a service that was elegant and tasteful, exactly as my father would have wanted. She wore a designer black dress and veil, sobbing at perfectly timed intervals, accepting condolences with gracious nods and whispered thanks. To anyone who did not know better, she was the picture of a devastated young widow. I felt hollow throughout the service, not just from grief, but from isolation. This woman had effectively taken control of my father's death, just as she had taken control of his final months of life. I stood apart from her receiving line, accepting quieter condolences from longtime family friends and business associates who seemed to sense something was amiss. Grace approached me at the cemetery after most mourners had departed. "Your father would be proud of how you are handling this," she said quietly. "Have you found what he mentioned?" I nodded slightly, unwilling to say more where we might be overheard. The key and safe deposit box information were secure in my apartment, along with the initial documents Grace and Jake had helped me gather. Sandra wasted no time. The morning after the funeral, she summoned me, Victor Reed, and James Porter, the family lawyer, to what had once been my father's home office. Now the space had been subtly transformed with touches of her taste, family photos replaced with abstract art. My father's collection of first-edition novels moved to make space for her design magazines. "Thank you all for coming," Sandra began, her voice steady and businesslike, all traces of the grieving widow gone. "James has the updated will that Thomas and I prepared shortly after our wedding. I think you will find everything is in order." Porter cleared his throat uncomfortably, then proceeded to read the document. "According to this, Will Sandra inherited the house, a controlling interest in Warner Properties, and nearly all of my father's personal assets. I was to receive a modest cash inheritance and a small apartment my father kept downtown, plus a minority share in the company that effectively left me powerless against Sandra's controlling interest." "As you can see," Sandra said when Porter finished reading, "Thomas wanted to ensure I was taken care of while also providing for you, Donovan. I think that is very generous considering. Considering what I asked, my voice tight with controlled anger. Well, considering your inexperience, Thomas often expressed concerns about your readiness to manage the company. That is why he brought me in, to provide guidance. Victor Reed nodded along like a puppet, adding, Mrs. Warner and I have already been discussing the future direction of Warner Properties. We have several interested buyers who have made quite attractive offers. Buyers, I repeated, feigning surprise. You are planning to sell my father's company. The company he built from nothing. Sandra gave me a pitying look. The company Thomas and I own together, you mean? And yes, it makes the most financial sense. The real estate market is at a peak right now, and Meridian Investments is prepared to make an offer well above market value. I am sure they are, I said coldly. And I am sure it has nothing to do with your previous relationship with their acquisition manager. Sandra's composure slipped for just a moment, her eyes widening slightly before she regained control. I do not know what you are implying, Donovan, but I would be careful about making accusations without proof. Now, as for your continued role with the company, we are prepared to offer you a generous severance package. That will not be necessary, I said, rising from my chair. I will be clearing out my office today. That would be best, Sandra agreed smoothly. And I will need you to vacate the guest house by the end of the week. I have plans for that space. I left without another word, driving straight to First City Bank. Using the key and code my father had given me, I accessed the safe deposit box. Inside was exactly what I needed. A properly executed will, dated 2 weeks before his marriage to Sandra, transferring ownership of Warner Properties to me through an irrevocable trust, effective immediately upon his death. There were also stock certificates, trust documents, and a USB drive containing audio recordings of Sandra discussing her plans with Victor Reed. Most damning of all was a comprehensive investigation report my father had commissioned on Sandra, revealing her true identity and documenting her pattern of marrying wealthy men and systematically taking control of their assets, often shortly before they experienced unexpected health crises. My next stop was to the office of Michael Harris, a formidable attorney who had faced my father across negotiating tables, many times earning his respect as a worthy adversary. Harris reviewed the documents carefully, his expression growing increasingly grim. Your father was a smart man, he said finally. This will is ironclad, properly witnessed, and filed with the court. The trust documents transfer ownership of Warner Properties to you effective upon his death, predating his marriage to Sandra, and therefore not subject to any marital claims she might make. What about the will Porter read today? I asked. Harris frowned. Based on what you have shown me, I have serious concerns about its validity. The signatures would need to be authenticated, and given this evidence of potential coercion and fraud, we have strong grounds to challenge it. Over the next week, Harris and I worked with Jake and Grace to build our case. Jake uncovered more details about Sandra's past, including testimony from her second husband's children about how she had systematically isolated their father and manipulated him into changing his will. Grace provided evidence that Sandra had accessed company files she had no legitimate reason to view and had held private meetings with Meridian representatives without board approval. I also reached out quietly to key business partners and investors. My father had trusted, securing their support for what was to come. The board members who had known my father for decades were particularly disturbed by the evidence we presented, pledging to back me in any legal action necessary. When our preparation was complete, I requested a meeting with Sandra and her attorney, James Porter. Sandra arrived, looking confident, clearly expecting to finalize details of my exit from the company. Porter seemed less comfortable, shifting nervously in his chair as I entered with Michael Harris. I appreciate you meeting with us, I began politely. I wanted to discuss the matter of my father's estate and Warner Properties. Sandra smiled thinly. I thought we covered everything in our previous meeting, Donovan. Unless you have reconsidered the severance package, actually, I have some new information that changes the situation considerably, I replied, nodding to Harris, who placed a folder on the table. What is this? Sandra asked, not reaching for it. That is your husband's actual will and trust documents, Harris explained, executed before your marriage and legally binding. It transfers ownership of Warner Properties to Donovan through an irrevocable trust, effective upon Thomas Warner's death. Sandra laughed dismissively. That is absurd. Thomas updated his will after our wedding. James has the valid document. About that, I said, opening another folder. We have evidence suggesting the will Mr. Porter presented was signed under duress, possibly forged, and certainly executed when my father was medically incapacitated. Porter paled visibly. I was assured Mr. Warner was of sound mind when he signed that document. Were you present for the signing, Mr. Porter, Harris? Asked sharply. Well, no. Sandra brought the signed document to my office, Porter admitted reluctantly. I then played a portion of the audio recording from the USB drive, capturing Sandra and Victor Reed discussing their plan to sell Warner Properties to Meridian and distribute the assets through offshore accounts. Where did you get that? Sandra demanded, her composure cracking. My father recorded your conversations, I said simply. He knew exactly what you were doing, Sandra. Or should I say, Cassandra Whitmore. Her face hardened as I continued. We know about your previous marriages, the convenient accidents, the pattern of isolating wealthy older men and mysteriously becoming their primary beneficiary. We know about your connection to Victor Reed and Meridian Investments. Porter stood abruptly. I think I should remove myself from this matter. Mrs. Warner, I can no longer represent you in good conscience. Sit down. James, Sandra hissed, but the lawyer shook his head. I want no part of this, he said, gathering his briefcase. I will be submitting my resignation from the firm if these allegations prove true. After Porter left, Sandra tried to stand as well. This meeting is over. You cannot prove any of this. Actually, we can, Harris interjected smoothly. We have documentation of your real identity, your previous marriages, your connection to Meridian, and evidence suggesting you may have hastened Mr. Warner's decline by interfering with his medication. The police are very interested in speaking with you. Sandra's face went ashen. What do you want? She whispered. You have two options, I said calmly. You can sign these documents renouncing all claims to my father's estate, and Warner Properties return any assets you have already liquidated and leave quietly. Or we can take this evidence to the district attorney and let the criminal justice system handle it. For a moment, I thought she might actually lunge across the table at me. The hatred in her eyes was palpable, but then just as quickly, her expression shifted to one of calculation. I will sign your papers, she said finally, but I keep the jewelry Thomas gave me, and the car. The jewelry goes back to the family vault, where it belongs, I countered. You can keep the car and your personal items, nothing more. Within an hour, Sandra had signed all the necessary documents under Harris's watchful eye. By that evening, security had escorted her from my family home, her carefully curated image of the grieving widow completely shattered. The news of Sandra's departure and my assumption of control over Warner Properties spread quickly through the company. Most employees were visibly relieved. Those who had been hired during Sandra's brief reign of influence resigned rather than face termination. To protect the company's reputation, we kept the full details of Sandra's scheme confidential, releasing only a statement that she had chosen to step away from the business following my father's passing. The potential sale to Meridian was canceled, and I began the process of rebuilding what she had attempted to dismantle. In the months following my father's death and Sandra's departure, grief hit me in unexpected waves. There would be days when I functioned normally, focusing on work and the challenges of leading the company. Then suddenly, I would find myself overwhelmed by the loss, the betrayal, and the knowledge that my father spent his final months in a complex deception rather than in peace. I started seeing a therapist specializing in grief and trauma, which helped me process the complicated emotions surrounding everything that had happened. She encouraged me to find ways to honor my father's memory while also acknowledging the pain of his loss. One rainy Saturday, I finally forced myself to sort through my father's personal belongings in his bedroom, a task I had been avoiding. Among his things tucked inside his nightstand drawer, I found a leather-bound journal I had never seen before. Inside were entries dating back to shortly after he met Sandra, documenting his growing suspicions and his plan to protect both me and the company. Met with private investigator today, one entry read. Initial findings confirm my instincts about S. Too many coincidences in her background. Will proceed carefully until I have proof. Another entry, dated just weeks before his diagnosis, was particularly painful to read. Transfer of company ownership to trust for D complete. Better to act now while my health is good and there can be no question of my mental capacity. S is getting bolder with her questions about the business. Must protect what I have built for my son. Reading his words, I realized my father had known far more than he let on, had been several steps ahead of Sandra from the beginning. Even as his health failed him, his mind had remained sharp-focused on safeguarding his legacy. The company itself needed healing too. The real estate market is at a peak right now, and Meridian Investments is prepared to make an offer well above market value. I am sure they are, I said coldly. And I am sure it has nothing to do with your previous relationship with their acquisition manager. Sandra's composure slipped for just a moment, her eyes widening slightly before she regained control. I do not know what you are implying, Donovan, but I would be careful about making accusations without proof. One of my first major actions was to rename the company Thomas Warner Legacy, honoring my father while signaling a new chapter. We refocused on the values that had made my father successful: integrity, quality, and community investment. I revitalized his affordable housing initiative, committing a significant portion of our profits to developing quality homes for lower-income families. In my father's memory, I established the Thomas Warner Foundation, dedicated to cancer research and supporting families affected by terminal illness. The foundation became a way to transform our family tragedy into something positive, helping others who faced similar challenges. Through this period of rebuilding, I remained somewhat isolated, socially focusing entirely on work and the foundation. It was Grace who finally intervened, insisting I attend a charity auction for the local children's hospital. There I met Amanda Davis, an architectural engineer whose firm had worked with Warner Properties years earlier. Unlike Sandra, Amanda was genuinely passionate about her work, talking animatedly about sustainable building designs and community-centered developments. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared interests and mutual respect. I was hesitant at first, my trust badly damaged by the Sandra experience, but Amanda was patient and understanding. 6 months into dating, I finally shared the full story of what had happened with my father and Sandra. Amanda listened without judgment, squeezing my hand supportively throughout my account. "Your father sounds like an extraordinary man," she said when I finished, "and you are very much his son." As Warner Legacy Properties flourished under my leadership, I often found myself reflecting on the lessons my father had taught me both directly and through his final actions. He had shown me the importance of trusting my instincts, of planning carefully, and of protecting what matters most. But perhaps more importantly, he had demonstrated that true wealth lies not in material possessions or property holdings, but in integrity, love, and the legacy we create through our actions. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, I visited his grave alone, bringing his favorite scotch and 2 glasses. I poured us each a measure, setting his glass on the headstone. "The company is doing well, Dad," I said quietly. "We just broke ground on the affordable housing development in your name. 20 families will have new homes by Christmas." As I sat there in the peaceful cemetery, I realized the most valuable inheritance my father left was not the company, the properties, or even the trust fund. It was the wisdom he had instilled in me, the example he had set, and the foresight he had shown even when facing his own mortality. His real legacy was teaching me to see beyond the surface, to recognize true motives and intentions, and to have the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. These were lessons no one, not even someone as calculating as Sandra, could ever take away. What do you think about my father's final act of protection? Have you ever had to stand up against someone who tried to take advantage of your family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance is not what is written in a will, but what is written in your heart. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the wisdom to recognize false intentions before they cause harm.